We will open the January 10th, 2023 work session of the Pinehurst Village Council. We have a couple items to discuss tonight, and the first one is discussion of the moratorium. Should we go straight to Darren, Jeff, or do you have any comments on that? Darren, go right ahead.
All right. Thank you, Council. Tonight we're here to talk about the moratorium again. As you know, it's going to expire as of February 3rd, and we have to come to a decision point on whether we want to extend it again. We've already set the wheels in motion potentially if we do want to extend it, so we've scheduled it for the January 24th meeting. Tonight I'm just going to give you a little background and we can talk a little bit about it, where we are in the entire process. So, the current 120-day moratorium ordinance, number 2214, is set to expire on February 3rd. Should council want to extend the moratorium again prior to expiration, a public hearing has already been noticed, and scheduled for January 24th, 2023. The original 9-month moratorium ordinance, number 2103, was adopted on February 10th, 2021. So since that time, we've had the area under a development moratorium while we developed the small area plans, and we've now turned to some of the zoning updates. The intent of the moratorium, and we extended another 4 times with the latest moratorium ordinance that we're under, which is 2214. The intent of the moratorium was to freeze most development to allow small area plans and zoning updates to be developed to prevent incompatible and incongruous development. The plans have been developed, so we have the final plans that have been developed based on council's and everybody's input. I got to get them up. We were just making some final touches to them, but they are essentially done. And the plans, but we have not done the full zoning updates yet. So here are the 2 areas. Exhibit A has been the Pinehurst South area, and that's kind of the area that we've now moved on to with respect to, we're going to be moving on to the form-based code on that particular area, and then Village Place, Exhibit B. These are, when we start to talk about accomplishments, we have had accomplishments. We've gotten some wins here, and we've got some things done. The first one I'm showing up here is the Village of Pinehurst Small Area Plan for Village Place, which is this document right here. So we have a full document here. I need to get this, the most updated one onto the website, but we have a document. This is a guiding document that we can use now to plan for future development in this area. And we're going to get into reasons why we can use these with or without a moratorium. They can be used.
Darren, am I correct that we have adopted one unanimously and one by a 4-to-1 vote, this council, to approve the small area plans?
I can't recall the exact votes, but we had votes on both of them. One was on, I think, Pinehurst.
Village Place. And
Village Place was May 5th.
Yeah.
And Pinehurst South was, I think, October or September.
Okay. I just wanted to be sure my memory is correct. Thank you.
Yes. Oh, Village Council was 614, and the Pinehurst South was 927. So that one took a little bit longer because we had some things to work through. So both of those plans, regardless of where we are in any particular process, we can still utilize those plans. Should we not to extend the moratorium, we can still use the plans as we move forward, and I'll get into that in a little bit. Pinehurst South, this is the small area plan. I should have just went to the slide because it says council action on 9/27. What we've turned to and what we've been working on since the last few months after that June meeting June council meeting to adopt the Pinehurst South plan, we've moved to working on the Village Place form-based code, and I think we're in a really good place with that. Too many documents up here and they all look the same. Okay, so the Village Place. So we now have a document that the Planning and Zoning Board has gone through this document. We're going to go through it one more time. I'm going to give them the draft. You'll be getting this at the end of the month. We're going to put it out there regardless so you can see it at any time. But the next stop I'm going to take with this is to finalize it kind of at the Planning and Zoning Board. But we have gone over all the sections of this particular document, and we're moving on to the implementation stage. And that one, which, well, big part of the plan is the regulating plan. The Planning and Zoning Board went through block by block of the blocks within the regulating plan area, the Village Place boundaries, and we actually looked at potential land uses, and we looked at building types for each of those blocks. So we've done that. We've also gone through, as a planning and zoning board, the PDO has a table of permitted uses. So what we did was we took and went through a table of permitted uses for each of those blocks within the Village Place area. So you can see, this is just an example that we worked on this on September 15th, and we went through every single land use that's in our PDO, and then we went through block by block to determine what types of land uses could be appropriate within the Village Place area based on the Village Place plan. And we spent some time on that. We did that. We're now moving through that process with respect to Pinehurst South. That's where we are with those. We've also, with respect to Village Place, we've also worked on a table of dimensional requirements. So if you come in for a development permit and you're working in the various districts, VR, VMU, VMA, all the different districts, we have setbacks, impervious area, things like that. We've actually, and the form-based code actually has a recommendation on that. So we took all those recommendations and put those into that table 9.2A that would be incorporated into the PDO. So this is another thing that the Planning and Zoning Board, we went through line by line again, and we've made some really good progress with respect to Village Place. Now we've moved, and Pat, you were at the last meeting, we've now moved to working on the regulating plan for Pinehurst South. And this is what we shared and spent a good hour and a half talking about at the last Planning and Zoning Board meeting, was that regulating plan for Pinehurst South. We're going to continue to work on that because I think there's still some things that need to be worked through, but we are going to continue to do that just like we did with the Village Place. We're going to develop that table. We're going to develop that table. We're going to develop the table of permitted uses, and then we'll work on the table of dimensional requirements. Village Place potential. This is just I don't know how that got in there. It was just a redo of a slide. So the council options at this point, where we are in the process, I kind of showed we have made accomplishments. We've done a lot. It's taken longer than I thought, but we've got a lot done. The council options at this point are really to extend the moratorium in both Village Place and Pinehurst South, to extend the moratorium in just Village Place, to extend the moratorium in just Pinehurst South, or do not extend either moratorium and work off the plans. Now, if council elects not to extend the moratorium, the developed small area plans and the FBC developed thus far for Village Place, and we're not going to stop moving forward, can act as a guide for future conditional rezonings and basis rezonings. I'm going to give you an example of how that would be used, how development has occurred within the village in the last 5-7 years. So if you look at some of the major developments that have taken place within the village of Pinehurst over the last few years, the vast majority of major development has come through the conditional rezoning process. That's a legislative process that you all have a hand in, and we negotiate some of the terms and conditions. But if you look at the table on the right, conditional rezonings, Walker Station, Sacred Heart, Greens Apartments, Community Presbyterian Church, Winston Pines, Royal Oak, Golf Pride, Magnolia on the Knoll, Cancer Center and Parking Deck, that was my first one, Village Chapel, Heritage Hall, Resort Lodge, USGA, and the upcoming Resort Lodges and Parking Terrace. And what that is, and why I'm saying that these documents can be utilized with or without a moratorium, and that the vast majorities went through without any type of small area plan. Sure, we use the comprehensive plan, and we always should use the comprehensive plan. But now we have a village, we have a small area plan, and we have a form-based code for Village Place that really can be utilized if anybody wants to come in and do a development in any one of those areas. Village Place, we have a little bit more control in that a lot of the current zoning in place just doesn't allow for anything to occur, and we own a lot of the property within the area. With respect to Pinehurst South, and a lot of places in the community, our PDO, most of the time somebody wants to do a development, the PDO, the basic restrictions of the PDO don't work for them. So you start to look at density, 6 units per acre. You start to look at minimum unit sizes, which is generally 1,500 square feet. When somebody comes in, they're usually wanting to talk about that with us because because our base PDO really doesn't, I don't think, promote a lot of development. It's difficult to work with. So that's why you see all these conditional zonings coming through. So if you don't actually extend the moratorium, we will continue to use these plans for anybody moving forward with any development within those areas. When Patrick was talking about the area around the brewery, the public services campus, we are in a lot of control of that area, but it helps that we have a visualization of what that area should look like based on these plans. So anything that comes through in that area, we can respond. So that's my basic. I don't have much more to say on that. You can choose to extend it, or if you don't, you always will have the backstop of these plans to work off of.
Oh, I thought you had a recommendation.
Maybe a couple points for possible clarification. So certainly we can use the small area plans as a backstop in situations where a developer wants to come and request a conditional rezoning. If it's not a conditional rezoning, though, if it's just in accordance with current zoning, it's by right in accordance with that current zoning, and we can't use the small area plans
That is correct.
or even the comprehensive plan.
That is
right?
correct. It would be more on the lines of an administrative review, like, some of the things on the right, those are major reviews, but, they're coming through, and you pretty much have to approve them.
And then the second point is we can't use the form-based code until it's adopted by council.
No, because it's not been adopted as part of the PDO yet. So we've got the plan written. Now we actually, when I started to show that those two tables, the table of permitted uses and the dimensional requirements table, those are things that we would actually write into the ordinance itself. So the FBC that we're hoping that council would adopt at some point is that guiding document to implement it.
What is the preference of the planning staff with regard to these questions?
The issue that I see is I don't know how long it's going to take us to actually develop the actual code language itself and how long it's going to take to get through that process. So I really can't give you a time frame. I don't know how long, and with the impending changes that you have coming down the line here, and some of the other pressures, I don't know how long it's going to take. I can't crystal ball that right now. I think we're really far with Village Place. I think that can be done sooner than later. Pinehurst South is a little bit further out because we've not even taken that up as a planning and zoning board yet to really get into the nuts and bolts of that one.
And where we probably have the greatest risk is in Pinehurst South.
The greatest risk is probably Pinehurst South because you have the most vacant land down there.
And the most recent development interest.
It is, and I can tell you that I have already talked to some potential people in that area looking at doing some major developments in that area, and they had already been talking about having to do a conditional rezoning because, again, the current PDO restrictions didn't work for the development.
Now, Darren, one of the criteria to continue moratorium, or moratorium at any time, is progress being made on the areas that are in question or under the moratorium. So what I'm hearing you tell us, though, is that progress has been and is continuing to be made, both at Village Place, which is closer to conclusion, as you just said, as well as Pinehurst South.
It is.
So from the point of view of being able to continue the moratorium, we're meeting that criteria, and that should not be a problem if we chose to extend.
Not going to make that legal conclusion, but I can tell you that from our standpoint, we have been moving forward. It's been slowly, but we have continuously moved the ball forward. And we will continue to do that even after I'm gone. Alex and company, I mean, there's going to be a down staff member for a while, but we will continue to move forward to get those plans to fruition.
And again, with respect to Village Place, which you mentioned is farther along, but I know estimating how much time remains is difficult. Was there any other information about Village Place you'd want to convey to us about that plan or the risks or rewards of releasing that or not from the moratorium?
I mean, if you look at Village Place, you look at the zoning in place, say along Rattlesnake. I mean, you have the Greens Part 2, which will come through at some point. Greens Part 2 is going to come through, and they're going to come through with a mixed-use building. They'll be able to use the architectural recommendations in the form-based code, and they will develop to essentially because I've talked with them, they will develop to what's in the plan recommendations. Now, when you go across the street, you know, where Atlas Inspections just got reconstructed in its current place. I don't know how much development you're going to see in that area. I don't know how many teardowns you're going to get or anything like that. So the only other threats you potentially would have going north are going to be on the west side of Rattlesnake, but those properties are all developed. You have the set of apartments that are zoned they're not zoned multiple families, so they're non-conforming, so not much is going to happen there. On the other side of that, you have some residential where we're showing office. You can't do much on that residential parcel, so I don't see a lot of threats in that area. Then you go down into the Village Core area, into the Village Place area, and the vast majority of those sites are under some form in that core area, just in the core area, have some municipal control, with the exception of that area that's the Punch Jones site, that's the old laundry site. That one has been on the market, so that's a potential threat, but I think it's a difficult to develop site. I can't think of too many other properties right now in the bounds of that area that are under, you know, threat of incongruous development. You go down to Pinehurst South, that's different. That's a different story. There is a lot of undeveloped lands down in that area. You look at the area south of Blake Boulevard, which is upwards of 40+ acres. That's probably the area where you have the most, where you have the most land for available for development that is actively being marketed at this point.
Well, and that leads to another point I'll make in a question. That is, as we've talked about the small area plans, whether it's Village Place or Pinehurst South, you've reminded us over time that these are plans for the future. We'll look into the next 30, 40 years, right? And but now we're hearing that there's considerable development interest in Pinehurst South, maybe even more than Village Place. So, and I have actually felt for some time that these plans, while we look at them as being into the future, I really think we're going to see a lot more interest in both of these areas much earlier on than 10, 15 years down the road. I think we're going to see interest right away. So for me, I'm trying to do the right thing for extending if it seems the right thing to do for one or the other, but I'm concerned that we may be just a little ahead of ourselves, even on Village Place, and keeping the moratorium in effect for another period of time makes more sense, so that we have a complete package to offer to the community, and we're not being challenged on anything that isn't quite right that the council's approved.
Let me just respond on the Pinehurst South. We've had interest. One of the reasons why, especially in that area, why we wanted to enact the moratorium was to give us time to get these plans done, because there was development interest. Yeah. There is currently development interest in that area. So there is interest. There's no doubt about it. Whether that interest aligns with what's in this plan, or whether it's developed, whether the plans that anybody has for those properties would require any type of rezoning. There hasn't been anybody that we've actually talked to recently in that regard. It was before we put on the moratorium. People had wanted to do things like put apartments on the west side of NC5. That just wouldn't work because it requires zone change.
Aaron, I think it is true, though, that what potential plans that we've seen from developers it kind of illustrates their interest in those tracts on the west side of Highway 5 and Pinehurst South would have required rezoning. I think every one of them was a rezoning, would have been a straight up rezoning or a conditional rezoning in order to make it happen, right?
That's the vast majority of the time we've had any discussion on it, it has involved some type of rezoning.
I think it's also true, and thank you for bringing up the Greens Phase 2. I think that also would require a conditional rezoning.
It will just require, it went through the conditional rezoning. They're still under, I believe they're still under the vested rights, but all they have to do is come back and get architectural approval from under the original plan for a two-story building, they have to get architectural approval from the council.
But I thought that based on our most recent conversations with them, they desire to deviate from that plan slightly.
Yeah, we did have that potential discussion, correct. They just, I don't know if they're still weighing, based on our last conversation, they're still weighing some of those options.
But did you say they'd have to come back to the council for approval?
They simply have to come back to, based on the original conditional rezoning, they would have to come back to approval of the architectural,
Right.
not of the use. And the original approval was for a two-story mixed-use building. So they couldn't come back, I mean, they've expressed interest potentially in adding a third floor to that building. That would require another conditional rezoning, so they'd have to come back through the process on that.
I'm sorry, which building were you talking about?
First floor resident.
They've talked about having potentially first floor residential, so they've talked about a number of different things. Some of the discussions were, you know, if we have all commercial on the first floor, is it potential that you could have a third floor of residential, things like that? And we've told them that as of right now, the approval is a two-story mixed-use building, and our definition of mixed use means that your commercial is on the first floor in the front of the parcel.
But any of those deviations that have been discussed would require a
That is
new
correct.
conditional rezoning.
That is correct. That's correct.
Kind of safe in that regard.
Correct.
Lydia?
All right. Every time we've extended this, I think I've asked, has there been development interest? Because my concern has been holding up development for somebody who wanted to develop. And I seem to recall that we have not had significant development interest in Pinehurst South. But it sounds like now there is more, from what I'm hearing, and I can understand not disclosing, not that we're hiding anything, but if somebody's interested in this land, I can appreciate they're wanting us to just talk about it in general terms. So is there more development interest in Pinehurst South than there's been in the past 6 months, year?
I've seen more development interest in the past 6 months, but it's been on for maybe 4 to 5 acres, 4 to 10 acre sites. We've not had a lot of interest on the west side, we've not had a lot of discussions west side, south of Blake Boulevard, and that could be in part because it's sitting in a moratorium, so people are just waiting for the process to unfold. And there's some issues with the economy too. So, mortgage rates or interest rates and all that kind of stuff could be driving some of that.
Lydia, I may have misunderstood your comments, but I think it's safe to say that we have been experiencing development interest in Pinehurst South dating back to well before we started this process.
But is there a greater development interest now? I'm concerned, and I've been concerned all along about holding up somebody's right to develop his or her property. But from what I'm hearing is if somebody wants to has a development plan, it's going to have to come before us anyway for rezoning. It's not, they can't just
It's
go
not
straight through planning. They've got to come through us.
Not everything will necessarily would have to come back to council for rezoning. Again, if a property owner chose to develop in accordance with our current zoning, which is out of compliance, if you will, with our comprehensive plan, they could
Which the
do that by
cottages
right.
was.
Yeah.
The cottages was out of compliance with our comp plan.
Sorry?
Correct.
The cottages
Yes,
was
it
out of compliance with our comp plan, which P&Z struggled with.
But it was already zoned, so they couldn't prevent it,
Correct,
prohibit it.
correct.
So that's kind of a case in point.
So what it boils down to is that if we don't extend the moratorium now, then we will have spent the last 2 years working on developing these plans and really working pretty hard on developing these plans. Plus, all the work that's gone into getting the form-based codes up to speed so far. And somebody could still come in and, as of right, develop something in accordance with the underlying,
Correct.
all but in name, obsolete zoning, and there would be nothing we could do about it. And so all of our efforts would be for naught.
I
So,
would disagree with it being for naught, because we have the
well,
plans
with
that are
respect to
done.
that one parcel. So, hasn't it always been true that in order for the moratorium to be effective at all, it needed to cover the entire process of plan development and form-based code, cranking it out, which you've been working hard with the Planning and Zoning Board. But then it's also got to go through the adoption process as well, because until it's adopted, it's just a pipe dream, right? So, as far as enforcement goes. So, I can't see how we can not continue on with the moratorium in order to get the thing in place. And there's two of these small area plans. We're trying to do them simultaneously. They're both complex areas. Village Place seems to be easier because it's got more going on in it, and Pinehurst South is more empty, and so what do we do? How do we tie that together? It's harder to, there's not so much existing development to start with to knit something together. But on the other hand, Village Place has been for decades a subject of discussion. So I don't think it's unfair that it's taking quite a long time in order to get good plans, thoughtful plans that are going to work well for the whole community.
Two questions.
Put through but also the codes for implementing them. And what was one last thing, when you said that the current PDO underlying zoning restrictions don't work for people. What does that mean?
When I'm saying, when I say that, I say that the current PDO restrictions for a lot of the development that we've seen, development interests we've seen in this community, don't really work either from a density standpoint, from a setback standpoint, from all of those standpoints. I refer you to look to the conditional rezonings list. Look at that conditional rezonings list. There's a reason why all that is on there, and they weren't all developed as of a right, because there was some aspect of that development that couldn't meet with the PDO requirements, and that's the vast majority of development, larger development that's occurred.
But I thought that particularly with Pinehurst South, when this came up, density, was a concern.
Density is a concern.
That in our discussions, that it was on the final day when we finally adopted Pinehurst South, that what we heard was that the plan as it was at that point was going to be less dense than the underlying zoning and it was going to actually be a step back in density and complexity and all that kind of thing. Is that not true?
You and I are not on the same page on that one, because I don't recall that, because I would.
Oh, yeah.
Because
Oh, yeah.
every one of these plans show a more intense pattern than what is currently allowed, and that's based on what was in the, and this is where
Then forget the moratorium.
This is
Just go ahead with what's in.
This is where we had the discussion about what the existing comprehensive plan is showing, which is the whole innovation hub, all that kind of stuff. That contemplates a more intense development. That's just what it is.
I would go back to, I'd remind you that we went back and crunched the numbers in comparison to what the theoretical possibilities were, base zoning in Pinehurst South, and we concluded that the small area plan recommendation resulted in less overall density.
Yeah.
That's my recollection, too.
Not on all the sites. It's on some, not on.
Less overall density, yes.
If you go on the west side where the apartments are, because of the limitation of 60 U's per acre on multiple family, I think it was calling, I'll have to look at that one more time again, because
How many
Don't-
units per acre are you
Goes
putting?
back to, it goes to because of the theoretical possibility of 3-story mixed use
yes.
on all of that OP and NC land.
Now I'm recalling some of that conversation, because now.
That's what Jane's referring to.
When we're looking at the numbers, when you look at the numbers in the comprehensive plan, what they ran out in the comprehensive plan, what was in the small area plan was probably half of the numbers that were shown theoretically in the comprehensive plan focus
And the
area.
comprehensive plan was less dense than the current zoning.
That's correct. You're correct.
Yeah, that's why we approved that unanimously.
Because of that.
Just food for thought. I mean, as I've been thinking and marinating on this conversation, an initial impression I had was that maybe because we're farther along with Village Place than Pinehurst South, and because there was more development pressure for Pinehurst South, that maybe you might consider only adopting an extension of the moratorium for Pinehurst South. As I think about that further, I don't think that's a wise move legally. Because if we're at this, basically at the same stage in terms of adoption of regulating framework, which is the small area plan adoption, it would be hard for us to justify extending the moratorium in one and not the other, I think.
Well, but I thought I was hearing that we are farther along in Village Place than Pinehurst South, but it's a,
Farther
both
along
plans,
with
there are
development, but
approvals in place.
Not adoption, right? So,
On adoption, yeah.
Right. I was prepared, knowing this was coming on, this issue of the extension, to just let it expire. I mean, it was my whole intent. But in the last 3 weeks, we have announced the departure of the head of planning and zoning. The Pinehurst Resort and Country Club announced a major development along Highway 5, not all Pinehurst property, mostly there, but that's Highway 5 in Aberdeen. And we know that there is going to be some widening on Highway 5 from our corporate limits or so going down to Sand Hills Boulevard. So it makes me wonder if whether or not a little extension would be wise, so we can fill out the staff, we can move further on the form-based code. Now, you've chilled my thoughts, because I was on Village Place. I am anxious to see that have some sensible development there. And which is why I raised the public service complex thing. But if that also had to be sort of swept into a extension, I feel better doing that than trying to split the baby and creating problems. But I think we're looking at just a different situation as to where we were 2 weeks ago. And one of the things that Lydia has pointed out on several occasions, and others, is the workload in the planning and zoning, strategic planning and zoning operation. And we're losing a big workhorse. That's a compliment. But so I will admit to getting a little cold feet about all those balls in the air at once, and we're here as part-time council members, every 2 weeks, and trying to stay up on top of things. So I'm
Pat, you
I've
just
moved
said,
in the last 2 weeks.
you just said little extension. What did you mean? You just said little extension.
I don't think I used the word little.
I think you did say little. So.
If I did, I misspoke. I just meant extension. I don't know what, I wasn't putting any time frame on it in my mind at all.
I think we should do an extension that's going to give us enough time to complete the Planning and Zoning Board's work with the form-based codes, and to then have that work brought forward to us, and we're going to take more than 10 minutes to go through it, just to guess, But until it's adopted, I think we have to be reasonable with ourselves. I'm afraid that we haven't been reasonable with ourselves. And the amount of time, this is a big project. It's not, it's.
I've attended almost all the planning and zoning board meetings on this topic because I wanted to learn about it. And I'm impressed with the attention to detail that I see on the planning and zoning board members, as well as the staff. And I've become to realize it is much more tedious work than flipping a light switch. Not that I ever thought that, but I did not realize the extent of how that form-based code was going into sort of every nook and cranny that could possibly come up. There were various scenarios that they discussed last week, some I would never thought of. So, I mean, like I say, if you asked me at Christmas time, I wouldn't have given a peep about, let it go, we're okay. But now I do have a lot of second thoughts with these recent developments. And I don't know, Jane, if I'd like to, because I don't know how long a runway they need to finish the form-based code. I don't know if I wanted to have to wait until they've absolutely finished, but I certainly would like a new person in charge. I'd like to see a staff filled out, and that would make me more comfortable.
Until the new form-based codes have been formally adopted as amendments to our PDO, they're
don't
not
have any weight.
enforceable.
All right, well, anyway, those are my
So
thoughts.
the argument and comments that Jane's made, I think this is the fourth time we're having that conversation. And we said the same thing. We want to make sure we have enough time to properly do this. So two things that I'd like to hear answers from, either from Darren or from Jeff or from other folks on the council. Number one, why is it taking so long? Because that gives us information to be able to address things to make sure we're moving forward and correct whatever the delays have been in the past because we thought we were giving enough time. And the second thing is, what are the negative ramifications of extending a moratorium?
I'll answer why is it taking so long? It's taken a while to get us through this process because I think during the whole process, I think COVID a little bit set us back with the consultant a little bit and having that interface with them because of COVID.
Darren, could you speak more in the
I'm sorry.
microphone, please?
I think COVID set us just a little bit back, and then we just got distracted working on other priority items that needed to get done that kind of took us off base. And I guess the other issue probably the major issue that diverted our attention to other areas was we have had staffing issues and continuity of staffing issues within our department where we have had to handle other things as a priority. The daily planning needs of the community, the daily zoning needs of the community had to take precedence, and we haven't been able to spend as much time working on this document as possible. Originally, when I went into this, I wanted to be able to have more Alex time to support me to do a lot of the planning work. But what was happened when we kept going through senior planners, his staff, and we rehired people. Those people had to be trained. So a lot of his time had to be devoted helping train and retrain some of these persons. That I had to pick up my natural other duties that I do around the office. So it was just all those things that have just kind of lengthened out the time frame. And then we got diverted on short-term rental for the longest time. So that took away some of my focus. So there's a lot of we're having a lot of balls in the air to try and keep in the air.
Let me try to help, Darren. I think there are two major impacts. The first is council turnover. We were on schedule with the development of the small area plans, relatively on schedule. And the previous council got their final look at a draft and issued the guidance that they wanted to see changed. And while that work was being done, we had an election, we have a new council, and just about exactly 1 year ago, that plan was presented to the public and to the new council. And instead of it being on schedule and adopting that plan, we wrestled with it for about, 8 months? In the end, you all adopted something that was very close to what was presented last January, but it was a significant delay. And then the second major impact, as Darren called attention to, was all the time and attention our planning staff has spent over the last, well, not all of the last year, but addressing the short-term rental
Yeah.
concern in our community.
Okay, thank you. So the negative ramifications of extending moratorium was the second question.
Well, there's potentially legal ramification. The other potential is it will have an impact on staff. We're going to still move forward we're still, regardless of what would happen, we'd still move forward. What happens is any moratorium extension, there's always a deadline at the end of that extension. That extension does create some pressure on staff. It just, there's no doubt about it. We need deadlines, but I'm just telling you that it's something that is always on our mind, that we're always watching and trying to, and we are trying to, we do try and make these deadlines. Whenever we propose to extend it 90 days or 120 days, we're doing it with the hopes that we can get a lot of that work done to the point that we can get something adopted, but something always gets in the way. Something takes longer than anticipated. That's just the way it's been during this entire process.
Okay. I appreciate the information. The other thing, just in the conversation, I think it's appropriate to add is that you have personal property rights. People utilizing property are not being allowed to do that during the moratorium if we're talking about development. Patrick, I appreciate your comments about there's changes in here and that we need to certainly look at that. And the way I'm seeing this, though, is we have kicked this can down the road a fair amount of time. The delays, in my opinion, I concur with some of the comments made here by some members. The delays have been very significantly weighted by council. Changing focus, I recognize that COVID has a factor. I recognize that changeover and turnover is a factor there. I also recognize that there's an impaction here on our people who have properties and maybe want to develop them. There's the legal potential, and I know we've talked about that before. John just covered it before, saying we're probably covered and things like that. I don't like the idea of preventing a citizen from being able to develop the property. We already have current zoning restrictions, and we talked about it before, that even the stuff that's being talked about and being developed would have to probably go through conditional rezoning that's on there. So I do not support continuing a moratorium on this. I think the responsibility lies with the people that are sitting around these tables. And we delayed this. So our paralysis secondary to analysis caused the problem. And I'm not willing to vote for another extension. We have done plenty of extensions. We do have protections already from the zoning that's in there. The world is not going to end. And I don't want to put more pressure on the staff. So I think we ought to stop the moratorium and move forward.
I think not extending it might put more pressure on the staff, given the changes we're going to see in the staff. Secondly, I think the other issues that we were detoured to undertaking were very, very important issues to our community, or we would not have spent the time on them. Third, from what I interpreted from what Darren said earlier, is that they're coming in. They can develop. A lot of people can develop as long as they develop within the guidelines that we currently have in zoning. Now, there may be some disagreements as to what that is, and that'll be settled by staff and council. But the idea that nobody can develop anything, Atlas developed that building right over there, beautiful little building on Rattlesnake. So and as you said, you've never seen more activity than in the last 6 months, right?
So specifically, what does a moratorium mean then?
Just as a clarification, there's exemptions within the moratorium ordinance that does allow for a limited amount of development. So because Atlas came in, they were using the same footprint, same site, they were able to move forward on something like that. That, we could potentially adjust that. There's a couple other exceptions, like Trotter Hills. There's essentially everything in Trotter Hills was able to go. But the vast majority of, if you have basically a vacant site, a vacant undeveloped site, that is where you're kind of limited, where you are limited with respect to the moratorium.
Yeah, because things that were in
Limitations are
progress could go on.
Statutory limitations that we have to comply with.
Say that again, Jeff? I couldn't hear you.
Limitations that Darren is alluding to are statutory limitations that we have to comply with. Now, there were some cases where we had to err on the side of caution to make sure that the end result was in compliance with some fuzzy language in the statutes, but it's a statutory requirement.
Yeah, I really don't believe, honestly, that council taking its time to make sure that the product it ends up with is the best that we can fashion to serve our community is kicking the can down the road. I don't think that's fair.
There's a balance.
Yes, there is a balance.
And I will tell you that in my
And-
opinion, the balance is that we are wasting a lot more time than we need to waste.
I disagree.
Well, I think when
And-
people come
and
prepared to
I
the,
would
to the,
also
to the
say
meetings,
that-
having read the different things and are ready to discuss it, then we'll be a lot better off.
Are you suggesting that people come not prepared?
Well, I'm telling you that we're having a lot of questions here that are answered by the reading. I'm telling you that there's a lot of conversation that we're having here.
That's fine, but we have an audience called our residents.
I understand
may
that.
be listening tonight or may turn on this a video and want to hear what the council's discussion is.
I
And-
understand that.
And the idea that we should be proprietarily hold all this information.
There is nothing
and
we are
share it
holding
with our-
proprietary.
So that's why we need
It's
to.
very open.
That's why we need to have discussions here. That's why, so our residents can hear the debate.
I understand that, and having discussions and making decisions from those discussions is very important. And I think that a lot of times we're not making the decision we need to do. We need to understand that our lack of actions have ramifications also.
But Jeff,
Okay.
I don't think at this point, and I
Moratoriums.
think we have opinions here, that our lack of action, I wouldn't characterize it as that, but since you used the words, I don't think that has caused any harm. And in fact, it's allowed us to continue and to do other things in the last several months.
I have voted in the past for a moratorium extension,
Yes, you did.
okay? Because I heard what, we have gotten to a point, though, where, in my opinion, we don't need to continue that. I think we have, the conversations that we've had in the past are the same conversations we're having now, in the sense that we want to make sure we give enough time for the staff to do this. And that is not allowing some of our residents to potentially use the property they want to use.
But moratoriums are not bad in and of themselves. They are provided for under our statutory scheme. They are a tool for us to use if we use it appropriately. So that's what we have to determine. Every time we get toward the end of a moratorium period, we have to think again, is it appropriate under the statutory scheme and the standards that are set forth for us to extend it? And at this point, I agree with some of the things that Pat has said, that we've got a change in circumstances here that's going to make it difficult for us to turn a light switch on and off and just get this done overnight. We've put an awful lot of effort and good effort into,
Apologize.
no problem, usually happens to me, to put our efforts into getting as good a product as we can for our community. And if we just say, well, the heck with it, we're not going to extend the moratorium just because we don't want to extend a moratorium one more time, we're missing the point that we need that protection in order to get all of the new form-based codes written and adopted. And Darren doesn't know how long that's going to take as he sits here tonight because he doesn't know who's going to be steering the ship. So
And Jane, to that point, Darren, you did say something like that. I don't know if it's in response to the question, but how much time would this take? I mean, what kind of moratorium?
What extension frame, that's what you're
Yeah,
talking about.
yeah, because
Okay,
you
Lydia.
articulated several factors, and I think you might have even come up and said, "I don't know." So we can't have an "I don't know" moratorium, so how much time?
I don't have, I mean, when I started to show you the table of permitted uses, when I started to show you the regulating plan, all those documents, those are all things that will be part of a ordinance that we write. So those are all, with Village Place, we've got a lot of that. We actually have a lot of that done with Village Place, the table of permitted uses, all of that.
Which is, it's great, and thank you for showing all that. But for purposes of a moratorium, we've got to know what is the time estimate, because it has to be for a stated period of time.
And, well, but I can't tell you that because once we get into the public realm, once we start to talk about the planning and zoning review, the public review, council review, I can't tell you how long that's going to take. I can tell you how long I think if we were able to just devote ourselves to write the ordinance, I don't think that would take, it's not going to take a lot of time to write the ordinance for Village Place because we got the form-based code essentially done for that. We don't have it done for Pinehurst South yet, but Village Place,
Darren, and along Lydia's lines, are not the Village South form-based codes and the work that has to be done going to be somewhat similar to Village Place?
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have to reinvent the wheel when we go up the road.
They're going to be a little bit, so what you're going to have in Pinehurst South, the idea in the form-based code, whereas we have lesser setbacks in Village Place, you're going to have more generous setbacks in Pinehurst South. So that's going to be the main difference.
Darren, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but a moratorium has to be for a certain period of time, correct?
But yes, there's not a statute,
No open-ended moratorium.
there's not a time period that I'm aware of legally on moratorium. You just have to continue to show that you're using the moratorium to eliminate the deficiency that you or the thing that you mentioned in the first place, which was to try and get rid of that prevent incongruous development while you develop the plans.
Right,
for that area.
which is what I asked early on in this conversation about
You did.
what the progress that's being made. But even so, the two projects are slightly different places in their development. Lydia, I'm sorry, did I interrupt a further question from you?
No, because I've kept a chart, and the first one was 9 months, and then the extension for 90 days, and another extension for 120 days, another extension for 120 days. So my assumption was the next one would have to be for a stated period of time.
Oh, it has to be, well, from that, I thought you were looking for a formula that has to be X amount of, no. Yeah, it can be 90 days, it can be 120 days. We've done them both. It could be 9 months.
Well, what about this? Jeff Morgan's expressed his view. Appreciate that very much. I'm of a mind to continue the moratorium, but under the following question. There's no reason that the moratoriums have to run for the same consecutive period of time, is there?
No.
All right. And we've heard that the Village Place project is on schedule, ahead of schedule, but ahead of where we are with Pinehurst South. Right? So why don't we consider a moratorium of certain days for Village Place on the one hand, which would be a shorter term, would help the staff focus to get that done, and a time period for Pinehurst South of a slightly longer time, because we already know that that's not at the same position in its development and completion. Because I do think if we can get to the point of having a completed product, as I guess Jane was saying, we're better off in going into the market with that, and we're honoring, in fact, what developers might have of interest, because we will then present them with a finished product that they'll know exactly what to do, and they won't be guessing. They won't be having to come maybe for some of the conditional rezonings, even though that's quite acceptable to do. So I'm wondering if there's a 90-day extension, say, of Village Place, and a 120-day extension of Pinehurst South that would seem to fit a guideline here that since we've gotten away and finished some other business in the planning department, those two timeframes I think would be fairly reasonable to consider for the next major project completion, which is these small area plans. I don't know how that appeals to others, but that's my thought.
I mean,
recommendation.
either period that you do, we'll work through it. I mean, we will continue to move, we will continue to work like we are now. We'll continue to have the work sessions. The Planning and Zoning Board has been very helpful scheduling special work sessions, and we appreciate that. We'll continue to do that. If we have the ability to continue to move that ball forward, and there's not a lot of other distractions that are going on, we can continue to do that.
Is it better to bring both sets of form-based codes together to council?
I would rather bring you the first one. I'd rather bring you Village Place first because it's the farthest along. And if we've made some critical mistake that you don't like, we can resolve that with the second one. So I'd rather get it to you first to know what you're potentially setting yourselves up for with the second one.
So even though you've indicated very well to us, Darren, that the department's going to continue to work on these two projects, it's very likely that Village Place is going to be a completed project sooner than Pinehurst South. And
It can be.
doesn't matter-
I already have it pictured in my, this is a problem, it's in my mind. I know which way the code is supposed to look based on the model that we're going to be using. So yeah, I think it can be done, the Village Place one in relatively short order, if we're able to dedicate the staff time to get it done. Correct.
I make a motion. I move that we continue the moratorium on Village South for 90 days, and we continue the moratorium, on Village Place for 90 days, and on Pinehurst South for 120 days. Is there a second?
Everybody's looking puzzled.
Well,
I'm
I'm
just doing the
wondering
math
if
in my
that's
head.
enough time.
I'm trying to move us to a decision.
Yeah, I understand.
I understand that, and I appreciate that. But I really wonder if that's realistically enough
We
time.
can always revisit it. It's a moratorium.
Nope.
We're hoping that it comes to fruition
I think
on
that-
90 and 120 days. But it may not. I'm not
Yeah,
putting any pressure.
No,
We've had these discussions before.
Wait,
Okay?
time,
We have extended it on several occasions.
maybe this is a point of order. We have scheduled this for a public hearing. Don't you need a public hearing in order to extend this moratorium?
I don't know if John was trying to look for consensus on, because we haven't really,
Yes.
I don't think we've prepared the ordinance yet, so as we prepare the ordinance, we could have that prepped for 90 and 100.
I think what's on the table here is guidance to staff to develop an
Correct.
ordinance.
Got
Yes.
it. Okay, thanks.
Correct. Correct.
Well, I'm
Can you
concerned.
make your motion again, Joe?
Well, again, it's guidance to the staff. It's not, we're in work session,
Consensus.
so, yeah, consensus. So that's my thinking right now, having heard everything that we've heard and listened to members of the council and Jaron and Jeff. That's the way forward that I would propose.
90 and 120 days.
Yes,
Okay. I'll second that.
right? Motion's been seconded. Now, we're not in a regular meeting, so I'm trying to draw opinions here and move this along. But if you are in favor of that, 90-day and 120-day extensions, just raise your hand or whatever you like to do. We'll see. 3,
I guess.
2.5.
direction to staff.
That's 2.5, you've got 2.5
We could-
and 2 not.
We could
I'm
push a
not.
button, we could get a fancy voting machine here and push a button and it would appear on the screen. I think we have
You have 2.5.
We have a bit of a consensus, not complete, for sure, that that's a time frame. But we do have to have something prepared
Yep.
to extend these, and I guess it'd be our next meeting.
Votes are not binding. This is just
Correct.
giving us guidance to bring something back.
Correct.
And you'll be able to reconsider this after a public hearing at the next meeting.
Now, why do we have to have the public hearing? Be-
Ordinance.
But we're,
Had public hearings on these other ones?
we did, actually, that's right, we did have it,
Ordinance.
yeah, and extending of it, yeah, not just since, that's right, we've had them each time.
And we have to do it because there's a statutory requirement
Right.
on this for moratorium. So we
Right.
have to have our notices published, that kind of stuff.
Okay,
Not all ordinances require a public hearing, but
no, this one does.
And Darren, thank you to you and your staff on the work for this, and we know you're working hard, so,
They are, and
We-
they
we do
will
appreciate
continue.
thank you. It is noted.
Okay. We'll move on into the other subject, the traffic circle. And I'm prepared to go straight ahead. I don't know if anybody wants to take a 2-minute break or something, but let's move ahead. Here's some thoughts from me, what we've been trying to accomplish.
I make a motion for a 2-minute.
All right?
You're making a
We'll
motion for it
take a 7:07. We'll be back here at 7:07.
On to the easy stuff, so.
Okay, we'll call the work session back to order. Check your microphones, make sure they're working. And we'll move on to the next topic, which is the traffic circle discussion. I'm sure we all have thoughts, and I'm looking forward to those. I put a few comments together about things that I've been thinking about to some degree that we've all talked about in the council. I've chatted with Jeff Sanborn over the past few weeks, of course, as well. And I think at the end of the day, of course, we're all trying to do something that's right. It's right for Pinehurst and our residents and even the broader community. We have had some discussions, just kind of reviewing what's going on over the past couple of weeks. We have had some discussions with DOT about swapping the timing of some of the projects for Highway 5 with the timeline for the circle and potentially other intersections that are important to residents. I would say if we had our druthers, we'd try to do something with Highway 211 and Rattlesnake Road, for example. And although swapping is possible among certain types of DOT projects and helpful certainly to me as an idea, this swap idea does not seem to be possible within DOT's present guidelines. And we're reflecting on emails that Jeff has provided to us in his discussions with our regional DOT people. Now, on the other hand, we're working with some extremes here. You either do nothing, perhaps, or make changes such as the continuous flow concept, which would make a major, major change to the traffic circle. And I'm not sure that our residents or some of us are prepared for that. I've also had a concern in looking at the continuous flow model, and Jeff and I did speak briefly about this today, about the impact that solution would cause, especially on Highway 15501, both north of the circle and south of the circle. And that has to do with the way the traffic lanes would be arranged on 15501 to create the continuous flow ability once the traffic comes to the intersection, which would be right in the middle of the circle, as you know. And Jeff and I talked about that this afternoon, and he corrected me on the length of the lead-in for those lanes, but to me, it's still a problem, and I'd like to have a chance to study that more, but I'm concerned there on that particular model, not only with the issue of what happens to the center of the circle, but because of the 15501 issues on traffic lanes, what does that do to our neighborhoods? You know, you got Village Acres on the north side, you have number 6, you have Pinehurst Trace. If you look to the south side, you have Course 9, you have Pinehurst Manor. And I'm just wondering how all those neighborhoods and the egress and entrances to those would be affected by at least the continuous flow model and maybe part of the flyover model, but I'm not sure about that, if that were something that we would want to look at. So I've tried to come up with some options to work with the DOT on that would allow us to do things that maybe are a little less drastic, but would potentially, if they worked, be something that would create some movement, some better movement in the circle, especially at high volume traffic times, but that is less invasive to the whole traffic circle area and the roads that come into it. And 2 or 3 things in my mind that I'd like to have us think about tonight, after we've all had some comments here, are these that might affect the circle and that we might propose to discuss with DOT. One of them would be some sort of traffic calming. I know that's a phrase that's used. I'm not sure all the things that it means, but it's an idea that has been in my mind, and other people in the community have suggested, is there some sort of traffic calming that would work? So that's an area to explore. Also, the possibility still of sequencing the entry into the circle from the existing entrances with hopefully modest-sized sequencing lights that allow traffic to either go or not go and encourage people to follow those.
Don, could I jump in on that one?
If you like.
After going back and reviewing their presentation on the 28th of June, that actually was already considered by the DOT.
Okay, all right. Then I would go back and look at that myself to understand that better. So calming techniques, potentially sequencing, but also an idea that came up last week. Jane and I talked a bit about it. If you recall in the continuous flow model, there's a change in the road direction of Highway 2 coming out to the circle, eastbound from the village of Pinehurst, our major gateway. And that is a road that connects up to Highway 211 from Highway 2. It's going to cut through that triangle of land that sits between 211 and Highway 2 at the moment. And again, it deserves a little research and it may not work, but I'd like to know if reworking that intersection would have a positive impact on traffic coming into the circle or not, and what the effect on Highway 211 might be if we made that connection. And I think there's a couple varieties of that particular idea that should be looked at. I'm not sure any would work, but again, these are things that I think we ought to at least try as a less invasive way to alleviate congestion on the circle. There's been a proposal to us tonight by John Root. You saw that. We can talk about that in the discussion that we have. And one other, a couple other things I would make as points of interest. There's discussion about, what the budget for the circle is and the different acquisition costs for land, the engineering costs, and then the construction. And all that adds up to around $58 or $60 million, which we all know. But I think it's important that we understand that that's not money that would be coming to us to do things that we want to do. It's whatever the budget number is for the project. So I'm not driven here by numbers of dollar expense, because that's whatever DOT needs to build, whatever they build anywhere. And the fact that it's $58 million or $25 million or whatever is not something that to me is important to consider. It's the solution, what best works for our community, what we think is right for Pinehurst. So the other question I'll leave on the table is this. This project, the circle, of course, has been around for quite some time, and what to do about it. Now, it seems to be part of two different STIPs. It's in the year 2020 to 29, right? And then it's in the STIP that is within the STIP, and I'm not sure I fully understand why that is, from 24 to 29. So I'm not sure when we're talking about this project being in the STIP and where it would fall in the priorities for the DOT and how our decisions will affect that, what we're talking about there. And it's just a question that came up that I'm not really sure about, and maybe some of you aren't either. Jeff might be able to answer that question. I'm not sure, but we can get to that.
And the question.
The project is listed, as I understand it, in two STIPs. There's a,
One step.
well, what is the,
There's an existing stip, and then there's the next stip that's under development.
what is the 24 to 29 period? That's the one under development that we're expecting Matt Day and others?
Current stip.
The current,
It's a committed fund, it's a committed project right now, so it's not,
Right.
it doesn't change going forward into the next step. Unless and
Okay.
until Patrick Norman submits the request to push it out, which is what he's going to do unless
Okay.
you tell him otherwise.
All right, all right. So that helps me understand that a little bit better than I did. So those are some thoughts of mine. I'm sure we all have things we want to contribute to this conversation, and we'll go right ahead and do that. But this sort of change of tactic or working with DOT on some less invasive options is something that appeals to me if there are any options that would work, and we just need to understand that. So with that, I'll end my comments for the moment. And I don't know, Jane, would you like to
thank you,
make your whatever thoughts you have?
thank you. I do want to express my thanks to the DOT for all that they've done to come down and explain stuff to us, and obviously the work they did ahead of time to get ready to do that. Their job on the planet is traffic efficiency, and that's a very important thing. But our council has to look at other issues as well. And there are other wrinkles in the prune when it comes to the traffic circle than just traffic efficiency. There's our historic landmark, the fact that it's a gateway to Pinehurst. The appearance of that gateway is important to us as a tourist destination and to the character of our village. And it seems that the circle works pretty well. It's not perfect, but it works pretty well, and people like it. In June of 2022, the DOT came to the council and made their presentation. And they gave two concepts, the flyover and then the continuous flow intersection, both of which would be big changes to the circle itself. And the benefit that was described to us was that by the time you got out to 2045, and this is based on current projections that they had with them last summer, at the AM peak hour, you would be able, if you did the continuous flow intersection, you'd be able to save about 2 3/4 minutes on going east-west through the circle. And if you're going north-south, you'd be able to save about 4 minutes. The flyover would have a benefit, but it wouldn't be as great. It would be about half that amount. So you'd save some time, something less than 3 minutes or 4 minutes, depending which direction. The cost of these projects, not to us, but to the taxpayers of the state. Back in 2018, which was the last time that the DOT had come to the council, in May of 2018, and that's when they talked about, they had 10 concepts for altering the circle, but none of them would have really changed the physical circle itself. They just would have added some lanes or whirligigs or whatever.
That's,
And at that time, four of the concepts had risen to the top, and a couple of them were $2 million or $3 million or $4 million. The most expensive one was going to be $11 million. Last summer, we were told that the flyover would cost $26 million. The continuous flow intersection would cost $26 million. But in the current STIP, and one thing I learned is that STIP stands for State Transportation Improvement Program, and it's the list of budgetary items for projects across the state. And it goes in 10-year funding cycles, but the current one is 2020 to 2029, but the next one is not 2030 to 2039. It starts at 2024 and goes to 2033. So I guess it's a rolling kind of a situation. Anyway, in there, this project, and it doesn't identify whether it's flyover or continuous flow intersection, is listed at $57.4 million, of which about $26 million is just for right-of-way acquisition. So in June of 2022, each of our 5 council members asked the DOT, how good are your projections? And going back and looking at the projections, they were using traffic demand models are developed for I guess for each county. And Moore County has one that was developed in 2014 with the 2010 census data and with information from us that we expected the ETJ to develop at the rate of 1 house per acre, which actually it's zoned for 1 house per 5 acres. So they were still using that old traffic demand model, even though in 2021, the DOT had started working on a new Moore County traffic demand model with a new algorithm and using the new 2020 census data, which shows, and this is, you can see this on Partners in Progress website, and so I guess State Demographer too, if you want to look there, but between 2000 and 2010, Moore County was growing at a rate of 18%. But now, between 2010 and 2020, it's down to 13%. So that the Moore County traffic demand module from 2014, using the old data and extrapolating from there, figures that by 2040, Moore County will have a population of 150,000 people. But the 2020 census data, projections by Partners in Progress, are that by 2040 we'll only have 134,000 population. So the rate of growth in Moore County, it's growing, but it's not growing as fast as it seemed to be back in 2010 when the old model was developed. And that's the model they were using to tell us that we were going to reach gridlock, by a particular date. Then there's the annual average daily traffic counts, which are on the DOT website, and they take them at lots and lots of intersections. They don't try to figure out from those where traffic is coming from or where it's going. They say, how many vehicles go through this intersection over the course of a year, and then they divide by 365. That's what annual average daily traffic counts consists of. So at the 5 spokes of the circle, if you look on the DOT website, at the DOT presentation last summer, they gave us the increased numbers of these annual traffic counts between 2014 and 2019, that 5-year period. They said there's been if you average, the different spokes have different rates of growth, but if you average them all together, 14% increase in the number of vehicles going around over that 5-year period. But then, if you go back and actually look at the traffic counts, there's now information from 2021, which shows that the numbers have dropped, such that starting back again at 2014 and going all the way through to 2021, there's not a 14% increase anymore. Over the 7 years, there's only a 7.4 increase, only about half as much. So the numbers have changed. And I'm sure, these trends go up and down over the course of the years, but at the moment, they're significantly, articulably down from the trends that the DOT was using with the old traffic model when they made their presentation to us. Lydia asked the question in the summer, where does the traffic come from and where does it go? Well, they do those studies. They're called origination destination studies, but they haven't done any in our neck of the woods since 2014. They haven't done them. I asked the DOT last summer whether, because we've got some nearby projects, and one is on 211 from West End going west. They're going to increase that from a 2-lane road to a 4-lane road. So will that bring more traffic to the traffic circle? And they said no. And then I asked, well, what about making 15501 south of the traffic circle? I guess it's really south of the Belk intersection. And Route 1 through Aberdeen, making those into super streets, is that going to direct more traffic through the traffic circle? And they said no. Also, in the Moore County Comprehensive Transportation Plan that was adopted in 2018, if you look at the chart in there, the different projects, and this was one of them, they give reasons why you need all those projects in different columns. And an awful lot of them, the preponderance of them, they say it's about safety. Safety was not put down for the traffic circle, interestingly. I also asked the DOT last summer whether a change to the traffic circle would pull traffic off of Route 5. And they said, no, it won't pull traffic off of Route 5, but it might prevent some circle avoidance of people going down Route 5 to avoid the circle. And, you know, we have to think about residential neighborhoods, Village Acres and Number 6 and others that have a major access out onto 15501 or 211, you know, where there could be backup. So my question is, how do we improve circle efficiency without such major alterations to the circle? Because both of these proposals seem to me to be extreme in the other kinds of impacts they would have on the village and its historic setting and its aesthetics and all the rest of it. Back at the 2018 DOT presentation to the council, it was noted that during the 2014, sorry about this, 2014 US Open, which had more traffic volume, but there was enforcement of slower speeds. They had police officers going around and making sure that nobody, that actually made it easier for the merging that had to take place, and it meant that the circle worked a whole lot better. That was brought out by a number of council members, that slowing the speed of the circle made the merger situation more efficient. So I wonder if we can try to facilitate the merger process somehow by lowering the speed limit, maybe putting rumble strips, I don't know, lights and signage, something, which again is not going to be 100% make the traffic circle so nobody ever has to wait for a couple minutes to go through it, but to improve the traffic circle flow. And I note that the village is also planning, just in the balanced scorecard that we voted on tonight, planning its own local multimodal transportation plan over the next several years, and we may gain some local efficiency on our streets there. Meantime, the traffic demand model, which is already in the process of being updated, that updating, putting in the new data, obtaining more current local growth and projections, which is what they do when they put the model together, and possibly could be done. And possibly we could even work on updating the Moore County Comprehensive Transportation Plan, because back in the fall of 2018, when the Village Council was asked to adopt the Comprehensive Transportation Plan, Matt Day from the DOT said in answer to council questions that minor changes to that plan could be made at any time, and usually a full review, he said, usually a full review will be completed about every 5 years, and that would be now. So it seems that we could, if we could take a little step back, push pause on doing a radical change to the traffic circle, we would have an opportunity to update the data and to try a softer approach of facilitating the merger process to improve, although it wouldn't bring perfection, improve the traffic circle function. I think John was right when he said that improving Route 5 and its flow from Blake North to 211 is actually more of an urgency and than the traffic circle at this stage of the game. And that is a project that's already in the STIP. It had been defunded, but now my understanding is it's been funded in the later STIP that's being adopted, and that's Project R 5892 with $39.2 million provided for it. But those are my thoughts.
Some of that's dependent on growth rates, if I hear you right. Changes in growth rates are one of your concerns, do we think have happened? Right?
I think that growth rates are not as steep as they were
Yes.
10 years ago, and that therefore we need to recalculate and see realistically what's going to be needed
Okay.
for the circle.
Thank you. Jeff Morgan, would you have any thoughts on this or comments?
I'm not a traffic expert, number one. I am happy to entertain the different comments that you've made there, John. I certainly appreciate the review that Jane has provided on this. My concerns are timing. One of the things that came out in the previous meeting that we had with DOT, and understood that there was basically a deadline, and that's even what the paper talked about that. Do we have time to ask these questions, get responses back, and react to that, and still be able to move forward in the current time frame that we're looking to get done, basically before the 2029 open to have this? So that's a question that I have, and I don't know the answer to it. Go ahead. Go ahead. Please do.
Unless Patrick Norman hears from somebody representing the village in the immediate aftermath of this meeting that you are in favor of moving forward with one of the two options that were presented, he's going to submit a formal request to pull it out of the STIP. And that the result of that might be that it has to recompete as this new STIP is being developed.
That was my understanding
Yeah.
from the previous meeting. I appreciate the comments here. After that meeting, we had some discussion. I guess we didn't discuss it again in the fall like we probably should have, and come up with the direction we wanted to go. From the two different options that were given to us, I personally support the flyover plan as the most palatable of those two. I do think that there is a need to make a decision and move forward with things. Now we balance that out to say, okay, is it better to delay and just not have a solution for another, I guess, 4 or 5 years? Is effectively what it is, or potentially have to recompete that. It's a tough decision, but I would lean on the side of a bird in the hand's worth two in the bush, and at this point in time to go ahead and make a decision and to move forward with the flower. That's all I got.
Thank you. Lydia?
Jeff Sanborn, I understand, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you've been dealing with this for a long time, and it's brand new to us. So I don't want to say, I can understand if you are, I guess, I don't want to put words in your, if you're weary of it, if you're frustrated with us, I get it. But I went back and looked at the June 28th video today, and it was really eye-opening to me. And you just said something that is inconsistent with what I heard on that video. You said the immediate aftermath of this meeting. But in the video, they said, we don't want to cram this down your throats. And I went back and looked. They had a slide that said next steps. And the first thing on there was public meetings and workshops. And you had said today what you think that means. My interpretation of that was we are going to get some public input. And, you know, we said it's a regional issue and you've got some, you know, you have some commentary on that. But this is not just our traffic circle. We use it, Aberdeen uses it, Southern Pines uses it, Carthage uses it. And, you know, when I hear public meetings and workshops and it's a regional problem, then I think, why aren't we getting, and DOT doesn't have to do it. Why don't we get some input from our partners? And, you know, another thing, well, let me go through this. It's interesting, Jane, you pointed out in that meeting, this is the first time we've seen this. Notwithstanding that, we all had really good comments that just, boom, hit the nail on the head for each of us. Like Jeff Morgan, you said, doing nothing is not an option. I agree. And I don't want to be the council that kicks the can down the road again. But it's such a big deal, I want to make sure we do the right thing. Jane, you said that. Pat, you pointed out Pat Malampi's op-ed article that said traffic circle will remain intact. But, you know, where I am now, again, let me go back to National Park Service. Well, I haven't been there yet. Ellen Rankin had told us, get us involved early and often. And I haven't seen that we've gotten them involved. And I was talking to John about this yesterday. Maybe we are the only National Historic Landmark in this country that's dealt with something like that. But what if we're not? What if the Park Service has dealt with this somewhere? Would it be worth asking Ellen? I think reaching out to them now and telling them what we're doing about, rather than have them come in after the fact to see if it's okay, I think it demonstrates our concern about our National Historic Landmark District if we get in touch with them soon and say, listen, we're dealing with this. Can you check your whatever you check to let us know if any other landmark has dealt with this? And if so, how did they solve the problem? I mean, there could be some consultant in Seattle or somewhere that's dealt with this, and I think we would be remiss if we didn't at least look out to see if that resource is there. And at least it demonstrates that we care. You guys, it's been almost 3 years since we started working on getting this relationship right. It was March 2020 when we first had that big phone call with them. 3 years it's taken us to get this right. So what does it take to reach out and say, this is what we're dealing with. Do you have any resources anywhere? You know, maybe her offer to meet with, maybe telling us to meet with us early enough and didn't mean anything. But if by chance it meant something, let's take advantage of it. So at the traffic circle, I want to find out what they meant by public meetings and workshops. If there's the opportunity for us to get people in this community together, and we've got a smart community and we don't have to reach out to too many people, but you had mentioned, Patrick, in one of our meetings, somebody here, and I think he might have been from Indiana or Illinois, who you might have said had some expertise. I know Mike Jones with the airport authority says he's got some expertise. But if we can pull in some of the expertise in our community and let them be involved, and they might be proven wrong. The Park Service might take every idea and say this is useless. Well, at least we tried. I think we've got to show that we're trying to protect this traffic circle. But then on the bigger, I want to get to what we were emailing about yesterday, and it's the global or comprehensive. Oh, you were going to say something to me? You look like okay. I called it the global solution. You called it the comprehensive solution. I've also heard the collaborative solution. And it's stepping back, and it's a bigger picture solution. And it brings, if I never hear the term Western Connector again, that's fine with me. I'd like to call it Western Parkway or something. But I'm really curious about, obviously there were some studies done to come up with that recommendation. What was that study intended to do, and what did it do? And if that study, I assume it was based on data, does the data need to be revised? Because that Western Bypass Parkway, whatever you want to call it other than connector, was not just arbitrarily drawn on the map. And I know we wanted to keep it there as a placeholder, but I think it's worth our effort to look into why that study was conducted, the data that was used to come up with that recommendation, what is it trying to accomplish, because that might be a part of a bigger solution. And then as I think about it, and I think comprehensive and collaborative, we now know that there's a whole lot more development north of us, with, all the new factories or whatever's going on in Moore County, Lee Campson, whatever counties are up, Chatham County. If that's going to be generating traffic, is there a proposal or something that might now be relevant because of this new development and might result in some roads being planned that otherwise have not been in the plan? So to me, my step back and take a bigger picture look at it includes revisiting that work done for the Western Bypass, but also looking at new development beyond our borders that might be relevant. That might be a stretch. That might be totally thinking outside the box. But, for something as important as the traffic circle is to our historic character, historic character. I think it wouldn't hurt from outside the box thinking. It doesn't have to be crazy thinking, but again, I don't want to be on the council that says it's okay to decimate that traffic circle. And I want to do everything we can through talking with the Park Service. Oh, let me another one. Back up. It's in my notes that I took from the thing, from watching the video again. They said that they were going to re-engage their stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders? Does anybody know who their stakeholders are that were engaged in the first place and need to be re-engaged? I mean, if they said they were going to re-engage the stakeholders, what does that mean? And I'm sympathetic if DOT is frustrated with the Village of Pinehurst, but this really is our first crack at it. And it's important to us that I think we be as responsible as we can before we pull a trigger. And again, Jeff Morgan, you're right. Doing nothing's not an option. If doing nothing means we're kicking the can down the road to another council. That's not acceptable. So I think that's all of my note, but I think I might have once upon a time asked to see the DOT work on the Western Bypass, Western Parkway, but I don't recall how much we have and how much I would glean from looking at that. Do you know why that work was even undertaken, what they were trying to accomplish through that?
Talking to me?
Mm-hmm. You're the only one around for the
What study you're referring to?
DOT when they proposed.
It wasn't DOT that did the work.
Oh,
Harpo, in consultation with an engineer from DOT that was doing the work on the behalf of the Moore County Transportation Committee.
okay.
And the intent of the study was to evaluate many different options for a location for a western bypass.
Thank you.
And what it concluded was the most effective one was one that's similar to what's depicted on the current maps, if you will.
And it was intended to accomplish what?
To identify the most effective location for a bypass.
To get traffic off of our local roads?
5.
Okay. Well, that's significant.
Oh, I'd like to just comment that my understanding of what the Western Connector was supposed to do
Western Bypass. Excuse me.
was not to take traffic off, it's similar to the circle situation, not to take traffic off of Route 5, most of the traffic, I believe it's something like 85 or 87% of the traffic on Route 5, and this is based on those old origination destination studies that they did back in 2013 and 14, is local traffic. It's not traffic that would be going from West End to Aberdeen.
We're not saying,
And
we're not
so
saying
what-
different things though, Jane.
I think,
It's fair to say that yes, most traffic on Highway 5 is local because that's where all the people live, right? The people that drive the cars live in Pinehurst. But that doesn't mean that the criteria that they use to evaluate different locations for the Western Connector wasn't the degree to which it took traffic off Highway 5, because some of that traffic is not local.
But the main purpose for the connector is in case the ETJ gets built out.
No,
And then you need to
no,
have.
that was not.
Even more
Another-
reason to
that's not-
revisit this.
look, I know there's an effect on the traffic circle.
I
from
was
the Western
here,
Connector.
okay?
Yeah.
I took part in all that conversation.
Right.
That is not what,
I don't want to bring the Western Connector
I
into this.
apologize for losing my cool here. I'd like to just go back. Lydia, you made a comment in your opening remarks that I just want to go back and readdress because it either suggested that I wasn't being honest or DOT wasn't being honest
No,
about.
no, there's inconsistency between,
During the June 28th meeting, the DOT, in no uncertain terms, told us that they were going to need to know, they were going to need to have a settled, preferred solution by the end of calendar year '22 in order to meet their desired timeline of completing this project between the 24 and 29 opens. They reinforced that to me in December. In the middle of December, I had a conversation with Patrick Norman trying to negotiate a way forward for you all to continue to consider this situation, and he agreed to wait and not send the letter he was preparing to delay the traffic circle project until you had the opportunity to discuss it tonight. You referred to information on slides in this presentation about public engagement, which are in the next steps, right? I don't know for certain when they said next steps, whether that meant after selection of a
Yeah.
preferred option or something that was going to happen between June and December. But what I do know is that we collectively gave them a huge cold shoulder during that June 28th meeting. We didn't give them any guidance. We didn't nothing occurred. They didn't get any useful feedback.
Jeff, that was the first time we'd heard that presentation.
Sorry?
That was the first time we had heard that presentation.
Okay, but we didn't give them any feedback either.
Well, yes, we did.
Yeah.
We gave them all, we gave
The
them
feedback they
our
heard was not
concerns.
that, not that.
Okay. But-
So
There you
what
go.
public engagement are they going to do?
We haven't heard from Patrick. I think we should. Everybody's given a chance to offer their ideas here. Jeff, thank you for clarifying.
Jeff, I
what you
wasn't
said.
saying you're being dishonest. It's just after going through the video today and what you just said, and I'm still hearing an inconsistency because I wrote it down. They said, we're not trying to cram anything down your throats.
And that's the whole point, right? So if they were cramming it down their throat, they would have come into the meeting and said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do a continuous flow intersection. Any questions?
But I heard it differently.
They gave you the opportunity to do was say, okay, we hear you. You have come forth with what you are, in your professional opinion, are the only two workable solutions at this point, and we have the opportunity to select A or B or do nothing. That's not cramming it down your throat. This has been a decade-long process where they have continued to engage and re-engage with us. You saw all the information, right? Jane, in 2014, these were not all traffic circle solutions.
2018.
2014, you got several of them that are intersections.
okay? In 2018, none of them are traffic circle solutions.
Yeah, there was a different,
Got
there were
worse
additional
because
things.
the traffic counts continued to build.
Right, okay.
Like
So,
I said,
that's good.
I understand your
We'll come out.
frustration,
Thank you.
Jeff. I
Right.
do.
Let's hear from Patrick and see what you might add to the conversation.
Thank you. I did do a bit of further research and reflection on this traffic circle discussion because there is a long history, as has been mentioned. Some of it I mentioned at the June 28th council meeting where we heard from Patrick Norman and the consultant. It gave a very comprehensive, I'll give them credit, presentation. Evidently, and anyone can correct me if I'm wrong as I go down these facts, they originally came up with sort of 10 big picture concepts years ago. Maybe it was 214 or something. Maybe it was 210. And then they narrowed those down in 218 and presented them to the then council, of which I don't believe anyone here was on that council, but you were here. As they indicated to us that in this past June, the alternatives they had narrowed this list down to back then did not resonate with that council or the village residents. So they were not, driving a bulldozer through us. They presented something and they admitted it didn't resonate. So the council, the then council, and local members of the State Transportation Board then specifically went back to DOT to come back with more options, more polished options, that were aesthetically congruent with the village of Pinehurst. And they had one caveat that the council collectively spoke about with the representative of the State Board of Transportation. That caveat was the circle had to remain intact. That's where we were moving. That, as a village, as a Department of Transportation. Okay. When they proceeded to present to us in June, the North Carolina Department of Transportation consultant referred to the circle, and you may have touched on this, as a gateway and a landmark intersection. And that was at the presentation here. So they had an understanding of what this meant to the village. And they did indicate, I made a note of this, that the most important part of this process will be public involvement. But I am in a quandary, though I think I figured it out, that they were talking about public involvement after a decision was made to go forward to engage the public. As I look back, I don't think they ever were trying to say they were going to go through a dog and pony show and try to convince the public. The National Register of Historic Places on page 64 regarding the Pinehurst Historic District said this. I found this at the library. When the traffic circle in Midland Road, NC2, at its junction with NC 211 and US 15501 was built in 1956 to ease, this is ironic, to ease traffic congestion, its very design continued the theme of curves and circles that characterize Pinehurst roadways. It immediately became a primary, oriental, or a mental, gateway to Pinehurst. Today, the roadways of Pinehurst continue to function as a unified whole and constitute one of the most significant aspects of the planned landscape. The pilot, after our initial hearing in June, editorialized and said the idea for the circle doesn't square. That was their immediate reaction. I'm going through these because I want us to remind ourselves and anybody else who's watching that the decision process has not been one where people are flip-flopping all over the place. There has been a pattern of consistency. 2 weeks later, the editor of the pilot wrote a separate column, and under the heading, "The Traffic Circle Plan Leaves Us Feeling a Bit Loopy." And he cited many residents critical of the North Carolina Department of Transportation proposal. On August 14th, another columnist in our local newspaper, Deborah Solomon, reminded everyone she wrote a column in 2010 about the circle. In the new column that she wrote in August, entitled "Keep the Pinehurst Traffic Circle, Fix How People Drive through the Circle." She hates to see the state spend money on another type of intersection that might or might not work, which is an interesting issue, because it's a bit of a bet. They're engineers. They do their job seriously, but they are making a bet of how that's going to happen and how that's going to work and how it's going to function. Okay. In fairness, I have, over the last month, maybe 6 weeks, I had one resident contact me directly, a friend, supporter, and he said, "You've got to go with this CFI proposal." He says, "I've thought this through. It's the only thing that I can see really working." And I respect his opinion. And then I read a letter to the editor from a gentleman who I don't know, but I think many of you know, who Mr. Sadawaso, who also expressed a very detailed version of support for the CFI plan. Those were the two comments that said, do what NCDOT is saying. Now, there are probably some others out there, but those are the two. Even my colleague prefers, Dr. Morgan, prefers the flyover. Okay, that's not the preference of NCDOT. But the overwhelming comments that I've received from village residents was critical of replacing these 6 acres of longleaf pines with concrete over a 3-year construction period at a cost of $26 million. And I realize there's a new dollar amount kicked around. The mayor referenced that. But at the June 28th council meeting, they did use the $26 million figure. And that was what the pilot reported the next day. And that's what the Sand Hills Sentinel reported a week later. Because I went, when new numbers were popping up, I went to try to find research to see whether or not I had misheard it. So where does that leave us? Most local opinion leaders and influencers do not want to level the traffic circle and turn it into some concrete intersection. Most residents feel that there is something that should be done, which is a common reaction. We ought to do something. Why do we have so many people? I don't want to put a number on it. More people than a handful say, "Why don't you do a tunnel?" Now, nobody comes to me and says, "Do a tunnel." Matter of fact, it was one of my first reactions back in May or whatever. Because I have any knowledge of how to do a tunnel, okay? None whatsoever. I don't think any of the people who come forward and say, "Build a tunnel," have any knowledge. They're saying build a tunnel because they don't want to see the traffic circle trees cut down and destroyed. That's what they're saying. Now, it was referenced by Lydia and others that it is the Village of Pinehurst's traffic circle, but it has regional implications. We would be not doing our job if we did not sort of recognize that. So what do? I like some of the mayor's recommendations. I personally, I think we ought to hit the pause button at this moment and acquire a little more information and look at the impact from the 4 major traffic construction projects that are being undertaken around Pinehurst in the coming year or two. We're talking about Sand Hills Boulevard, the Super Street. We're talking about the Aberdeen to Highway 5 down to Sand Hills Boulevard. We're talking about Morganton Road and 15501 with the intersection where the Target is going to take place. And we're talking about the widening that's going to go on outside Pinehurst limits, but all the way to 74 and 73, which was mentioned earlier. So we're not in a vacuum here. This isn't the only project that is really starting to bubble. Ours is a little more at the end of that tail as they're proposing it. But there are going to be a lot of construction sites going around here in this area. So during this time period, I think we can acquire some more historic traffic data. I want to grab something I had asked for from DOT, and they provided it to us, and I was impressed with it. This was the Pinehurst Traffic Circle historic traffic growth. And the only, I'm trying to disagree with an engineer because they're always right, more or less. But the only arrow pointing downward as far as traffic growth is the arrow on 211. The arrows on 15501, the arrows even on number 2, on NC2, have a little uptick. So it makes me question that 211 data. But I can only question it. I can't really, they see things I don't see. Their projections are that it's going this way. But I also would like to see, during this time period, NCDOT adopt some of the constructive suggestions made by some of our residents in the newspaper or in meetings with some of us. And so I'm right now plagiarizing from constituents. They'd like to see more signage on the side of the roads and approaching the circle on the pavement, alerting drivers earlier as to how they are supposed to adapt to that traffic circle so that we reduce the number of lane switchers. They'd like to see a little more enforcement, maybe increase fines to deter lane switchers. One person said maybe, things were alerted, some sort of metering of traffic lights. Maybe a different word from sequencing, which I guess is not held in high esteem. And one made a mention of rumble strips to keep people alert there so that they're not like this while they're driving and get rear-ended. These are, again, I'm plagiarizing from constituents. But they're something that should be thought about. And then one woman, I don't know her, but I'm going to quote her name, Barbara Cohen, Pinehurst. She said, our Pinehurst traffic circle is a representation of our area's beauty. Why would we replace the circle with roads and traffic lights? Why would we risk changing the circle? I travel around the circle daily. Yes, there's a line of cars at certain times. Why don't you study those times? I think we do study those times, but what I took from her letter was the sincerity of how she felt, and I think she's representative of a lot of our residents. Additionally, and I mentioned this at June 28th, so I'll repeat it. I think NCDOT should give serious consideration to a few less expensive and less time-consuming projects that will help traffic flow in the village. The right-hand turn lane on Rattlesnake Road to make sure the parents with kids and strollers and the kids riding bikes in the community center is it's not that I'm not going around because it borders on 211. It's ours only. Okay, thank you. Thank you. I think we should. A left-hand turn lane on Beulah Hill Road to Linden. I've heard many times from some folks on that. These are minor, but I believe both of them would be impactful on our residents. Finally, I'd like to close with I'm going to sort of come full circle here. I talked about the previous council and the caveat that they placed on it. So I'd like to close with a blog post I stumbled on while preparing my remarks. It's dated last December 15th from former Mayor Nancy Fiorillo, who was on this council at the time when they went back to DOT and said, leave the traffic circle intact. Here's what she said. Quote, the circle has to remain intact. That's what she said then. What she said on December 15th, watching my notes here, the former mayor posted her comment on a blog. And it reads, quote, I like the traffic circle the way it is. Slow down and let people merge. Now, I'm not adopting that as my own policy, but what I am saying and what I'm trying to convey as best I can is that our residents are not, they're not in a quandary. They want to do something, but they don't want to blow up something they've seen all their lives, even if it's only been a short time here. I will admit, I went back and looked at the flyover, okay, because it would look less destructive. It is less destructive. I just don't know if that flyover, I'm skeptical of the 211 issue. That's my problem. I think the future of traffic is coming down 15501, the thrust of it, which is a 2-lane road from Carthage, and it's going to Target. I think that's what we're going to see. And that 2-lane road there is going to be one long expressway, Long Island Expressway, for those of you who are familiar with traffic problems. So what I'm offering when I say sort of hitting the pause button, I've offered some what I think are constructive and cooperative suggestions. I understand DOT, bureaucracies, how they function. They've got deadlines to meet. They've got to make decisions. It's a whole state. They sit at a table with, we're District 8, I guess, which means there's at least 7 other districts, and they sit around and they argue of where should money go. So I understand that. I based on everything I've learned, everything I've listened to, I am just not comfortable saying, come flatten that place out, take a few years, and put in this system. There's one continuous flow intersection in the state of North Carolina. It's in Charlotte. I have not gotten to see it. There's about 25 in the country. It's something of a new phenomenon, and it probably works in a lot of places. But I don't know if any of those replaced something in a National Historic District. And I am very cognizant of what my predecessors here went through regarding the National Park Service and our good housekeeping seal of approval from them. So I too don't want to jeopardize that. Anyway, that's all I had to say. I just felt it was important to lay out where I'm at in my thinking. Thank you.
Appreciate everybody's comments. I think it shows a lot of thought, a lot of investigation over time and in recent weeks and days. Generally, I think what I'm hearing is, and we want to talk about this a little more, offering some options or trying to work on our own in some cases or with the DOT to find some options that may affect the circle in a positive way from a congestion point of view at certain rush hours. But that there isn't a desire, as we hear from our residents and as we do our research, to make a change that's going to drastically and physically change the look of the traffic circle. That's, I think, what most of us are expressing. So let's react to that comment or other things we've heard. Lydia, I think you're
Yeah,
about to ask a question.
but we've got to look like we're doing something, and I was taking notes as I was listening to everybody, and some of the things I've got on maybe a to-do list is, Jane, it sounds like we need more data, updated data.
Yeah, I would include that in what, I think we need to recommend and to DOT that there's some things that we want to work on and want to know more about, and some ideas we offer up for consideration about discussion about the circle, that are less invasive was my word, that may help some solutions.
And to your point, I think you said something, some of this we may do on our own. I don't know if we can go get this data,
What I meant
but
by that, to be very specific, is Jeff Sanborn just a few minutes ago reminded us that with respect to the Rattlesnake and 211 intersection, we've known for a while now that if we want to make any changes there, that's probably going to be on our dollar, but DOT has to approve that, right?
Doesn't have anything to do with the traffic circle.
No, but it emphasizes a point that some of us have made, I think, that there are some other projects.
Plus, it helps to relieve pressure on the traffic circle because it makes it more accommodating for more through traffic, cut through.
Yeah. But it's a part of those things that, from a traffic management and traffic congestion point of view, there are a number of projects around that many of us feel would be more important to address as soon as practical, rather than worry about the traffic circle at this point in time. That's what I'm hearing.
I am.
Was there another point, Lydia?
Oh, yeah, just got a list here. More data, but this is based on, James, primarily what you were saying, and Patrick, you had your graph that you were questioning. I think it's worth reaching out to the Park Service there for two reasons. Good faith on our part. They've asked us to get in touch with them early. I think it shows good faith on our part to do it, but there may be something that comes out of that in terms of other communities who've dealt with a similar traffic nightmare. I think we maybe should dust off the Western bypass files and see if there's something in there, and that might come under the update the data. And it might be something that we really need to talk about. And, no prior councils have been, or some councils have been dragging their feet on that, but I think we owe our residents, we need to take a fresh look at that and do something with it. Either say this doesn't work or it does work, but it doesn't, just because we talk about it doesn't mean we're going to delve into somebody's going to delve into property and, eminent domain and all that. And then I would like to see some collaborative regional effort. And maybe that's something we do. Maybe we reach out to the mayors and reach out to the county and say, give us your two best people and let's get them together and let's share ideas. And I sat down in the conference room with two Pinehurst residents and I watched them share ideas. It may go nowhere, but at least we get resident involvement and it may come up with something that can buy us some time. I don't think it could be the long-term solution, but it may be something that will make the circle work better longer and preserve the circle. So I'd really like to see some regional collaborative effort, and I think we could pull that off. I don't think that's something we need to rely on DOT to do. Mm-hmm. So those were my list of things: get more data, talk to the Park Service, dust off the Western bypass files, and do some collaborative regional effort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a package of things, and those would be certainly some of them that we would recommend to the DOT that we want to pursue. Some would be on our initiative, but we want them to be aware of it, and others would be in cooperation with them. And I think we do have a cooperative relationship.
And I think it shows our residents that we're doing something.
Yes, because that is our desire, to do something to try to resolve this problem. I don't think we're unaware that there is a problem from time to time in rush hours. I think, as I made its comment at the initial part of the discussion here, that it's the invasive nature of the two leading solutions that bothers us and seems to bother our residents. And so that's what we're reacting to.
And as between the two, I agree with Jeff Morgan and maybe Patrick that the flyover to me is less destructive to the.
Can I make an observation?
Yeah.
On
if we could, but please.
I hear the direction, and so what I'm hearing is my direction is to tell Patrick Norman that the council is not in favor of either of the two proposed options, and therefore he is going to need to submit his letter to delay this project. Here's my concern. You're also saying that you won't accept a solution that looks less like the current traffic circle than the flyover, which retains the circle. It's all still there, all right? And if this project does, in the end, have to recompete, Division 8 is going to look at this and say, this is not a realistic expectation. We're not going to get there. They're not going to put their points on this project, and it won't get selected for
Next turn.
the next time, or the next time, or the next time.
You-
That's my concern.
Yeah.
I'm not making a prediction, but if I was in Division 8 shoes, that's exactly what I would do.
However, if this council or our successors, after some of these things that we're recommending tonight or considering tonight happen, and if they're not successful, point may come back to these other solutions, particularly the one you mentioned just now. I would have to think that the DOT would reasonably take that under consideration.
We continue to say no to everything that doesn't look like the current circle.
Well, you know,
I
but
have a
Jeff,
long history of this.
you're right. Let me just say where you're right. And I don't, I'm going to defend previous councils because I really don't think they kicked the can down the road. They actually made decisions. That is what they felt like. There's no wiggle room in what's gone on in the past. I do think, Jeff, that if the next cycle, whenever that is, 2, 3 years, whatever it is, if we have more and newer data that might indicate that 211 isn't the bigger problem, which is, I think, is how they approach it. They may also come up with some other alternative that maybe have a different view of the world. In other words, I don't think they're. I've watched them. I don't think they're locked in to having to do.
10 years of this costs money,
Yes, you're right.
all right? They've gone through 10 years of this in pursuit of a solution that we could be comfortable with. As the years have gone by, the traffic counts have gone up, and the things that looked more like the current traffic circle that were feasible, or they thought were going to be feasible back in 2014, aren't anymore. We continue to insist on something that looks like the current traffic circle. That's the lens. You got to look at this problem set through their lens, right? Are they going to continue to invest in this effort? Would you?
I think they would pause and revisit it. And I'm not saying they're going to. All I'm just saying is, they don't burn that. It's on the shelf. They may revisit in a few years, and they may have a different view. Or, you know what? There may be a whole new council in 5 years that says, my gosh, we need to. I'm not betting on that, okay? Because there's been a consistent pattern for now 12 years.
Got to restart the whole process again,
I
right?
understand
You got to recompete, and you got to restart.
Oh, the turnover in public bodies.
Line work we did.
That's actually something I wanted to address. It's clear from hearing everybody that if you look at the three options that we have, continuous flow, flyover, or delay, on this, that the current council is choosing to delay this, talk more, get more information, and reanalyze it. If we go that direction, one of the things I think we need to do is to set a process up with objectives, timelines, engagement with DOT, engagement with those stuff, and set the plan as to what's supposed to happen. So as we do change, let's say in a year with new elections coming up and new folks coming in on the council and things like that, they have a framework to work from, and at a time where a decision is going to be made in a timely manner, that DOT can use this to progress forward. Now, I think that Jeff's comments need to be heeded here, because it's a possibility that they're going to come back next time and say, by the way, the secondary option is the continuous flow intersection, and this is what we recommend primary, which is even less like the traffic. So I don't know. But we're having the counts that seem to be going up. Point of it is, we're now selecting to not take one of those two options. Talk more, get more information, go through a new process. I would ask that we make sure we're working with our staff to come up with that process and time hacks to keep us in line to make sure this doesn't get delayed again.
Thank you, Jeff.
I think,
Go ahead.
I think that's a reasonable approach because, at least for the two new folks, this was pretty much, here you are, guys. Study it. There's a whole bunch of history. You can go look it up if you want, but this is where we're at. And yeah, obviously, it didn't hit me in the right place. So.
I think, Jeff Morgan, taking up on your idea there of setting up the process, yeah, that process would include evaluation of these different ideas that we've come up with tonight, and also a host of other things that would relate to the growth rates, but other things that would affect a decision in the future. So there's a body of opinion there, a body of things we've done that decisions can be made on what to do if the issue continues to be a problem.
I appreciate that. And I do understand for the record, in my opinion, that's still Plan B. Plan A was make
Yes.
the decision on either continuous flow or a flyover.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I understand it. Yes.
I think it's a good idea too, Jeff, but I think we have to remember that not all of the research and update is within our control to do. Part of it is, but part of it's, DOT has to do. And I really do think it's a shame that we can't trade out the Northern Route 5 project for the traffic circle, just flip the timing on those two. But
I thought.
I
let me
think,
just
I
say-
think, just a minute.
Got a little bit of a contrarian
Yeah,
viewpoint on that.
I think that there are issues that are beyond our control, but we ought to ask about can we move some things up or whatnot? All Highway 5 directed, more or less, and that's going to be hard to move, but we're working. Jeff, go ahead, please.
So here's my contrarian view. So you get these from me quite often, I know, but I think that fixing Highway 5 without doing things like fixing the traffic circle and building the Western Connector is actually counterproductive. Because if you accommodate more traffic and more free flow of traffic on Highway 5, what it does is it relieves pressure on the traffic circle. And in the end, you're still left with a problem on Highway 5. Because traffic's like water. It seeks its, the path of least resistance.
That was my
And
line.
it's just going to seek a new equilibrium. So you invest in this ease of travel on Highway 5, and all it does is take pressure off the traffic circle, when really what we should be doing is fixing the traffic circle and taking pressure off Highway 5.
Which is why some of these ideas about some things that might help the traffic circle, we want to evaluate through this process that we've just talked a bit about. And
I wanted to say, I do understand how the Department of Transportation has this sort of real handcuffs around what they can move in and out of STIF, because we're District 8, as I say, that means there's at least 7 others. And if everybody could do that, it would be sort of a big casino. And it could create problems from a planning standpoint. I wish they gave us all like one free pass to make a swap, but I understand their rules, so nothing to do about it.
What I feel the message is that we want to take action to find and look into some alternatives for the traffic circle that may or may not prove to be helpful, but they're at least something we need to do. And we've listed some specific things here tonight, but there's issues that have been identified too about ideas out there that might be that maybe haven't been considered. But so the message is, we want to move forward to make positive change and create a better traffic circle situation during rush hours. And we're not oblivious to the other solutions that have been proposed, but we think they're not appropriate for Pinehurst at this time. At least, yeah, that's full stop. So it's that's the message that I feel is what we need to convey, and to work with DOT on, because they would be our partner in looking at some of these options. Is that a message that we're generally comfortable with?
I'm fine with that.
Yep.
You know, and in hearing that, I don't think we're asking them to go back to the drawing board.
No.
We're just saying this is, what you're proposing is radical. Which one of you said, let's hit the pause button?
I think I did too.
Yeah. And do everything we can. I mean, I've got a list here, and then maybe we get through this list and realize, you know, those really aren't, that flyover's really pretty good. But until we do everything we can to protect the circle, I'm not comfortable saying yes to either one of those, which doesn't mean I'm saying no. I'm just saying, let us see what we can do to improve the traffic for
Yeah.
now.
Why don't we do this? We all have some ideas about what would be in this process. What are the things that we're seeking to do and the objectives? So could we maybe send those thoughts around to Jeff and I think Doug, since he's been sitting here with us tonight, and Kelly, and then I'd be happy to work with one or another council members and the staff to kind of consolidate that, and we can maybe discuss that at our very next meeting.
Sounds good.
And again, the goal of the process is to ensure that we develop a plan in conjunction with our stakeholders, with DOT, so the next time that we have to make this decision, we are not delaying a decision in the future.
Yeah, I agree with that. I wanted to add one thing, and Lydia, you have something to say on this, is to whether or not we need to do anything ourselves regarding the National Park Service and SHPO and all these outfits, or we just sort of contract that out to the NCDOT.
Keep in mind that we're going to have a visit
Yeah.
by the National Park Service and
So they're going to be here. I mean,
I'll put my thoughts.
to have a conversation with them.
Okay, all right, I didn't realize that.
but we do know that there's been some input.
Point of engagement with the National Park Service and SHPO, we do know that DOT has already been in conversations with both of those entities about this project and the Morganton Road
Highway 5.
Highway
Highway 5
5.
intersection project. So that dialogue's already been happening.
Okay.
But we haven't heard that ourselves, so I think it's important that we do. We don't know
We
exactly.
haven't heard their
We just know the
perspective
general
directly.
point. Yeah, right. So this, and I think if you have not already, I think you need to make sure you have in your calendars the presentations that they will make
Early
on
February, right?
the 7th and 8th of February,
Six
or 6th and 7th. Monday is the 6th, I think, yeah, and the 7th.
That been sent out to us? Should we already have that info?
You should already have that. Kelly can arrange for that.
Put out again.
Okay, yeah, please do. Maybe I have it. I don't forget.
Who's
All right.
coming on the 7th and 8th? The National Park Service is coming on the 7th and 8th?
6th and 7th of February.
The 6th at 6 PM, the 7th at 1 PM.
Yep, I got it.
Should have that, yeah. That was,
The 6th at what time?
The 6th at 6
6.
PM and the 7th at 1 PM.
Have to go to one of them, right?
One or the other, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, you can
okay.
come to both, but
I
yeah.
got it on my
And
calendar. Thank you.
where are they going to be?
Here.
this is their presentation to our public,
They're
not just to
presenting
the
the
council.
final study, basically.
It's the final study results.
We had an email about it now.
You got the
It's on-
Correct.
on my calendar.
Correct. Correct. Right. So again, this is a positive message emphasizing our concern about the traffic circle, setting up a process to work on our own and with the DOT to look at some potential solutions, but to set up a process to evaluate those and to move forward with what we can do to assist relief of the traffic circle.
And in connection with that, I think you had said we should send our ideas to each other and
Yeah,
Jeff
why don't
and
we-
Doug, and
I
so
think
we
we
send our
should.
ideas.
Yes, yeah, just council members, Jeff, Doug, Kelly would be my guess, Jeff, if that's all right with you, Jeff Sanborn. All right. Any other comments? Any suggestions as to future topics for the work session? I think we had a couple ideas already tonight expressed earlier on. Including Pat's initial.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I will mention, and Jeff Sanborn, I assume, feels the same way. We need to get to closing the loop with the neighborhood advisory committees.
Yeah.
There seems to be, they're in flux as to how they send an email. You know, this sort of the functioning, the governing of how they're supposed to operate a little bit because of what we accurately told them last year. So I think we need to
Yeah.
find a way to close that loop. That's all.
Yeah, it's been, one of those other items been hard to work on, but important. All right.
You know, something that came to mind, Doug, is when you met with us about how we were going to update the comp plan, and I don't know if we ever came to some resolution on how, when, what with the comp plan. I know at some point it's supposed to be revised. And we had I just don't know where we left that. No hurry on it. It just came to mind.
So we've talked about other work session business for tonight. I'm seeing none. We've talked about future agenda items. Pat, did you have?
I'm just going to ask one other question. I know Jeff Batten isn't here, but we had that meeting, was it last meeting, when we went over the downtown amenity plan and upgrades.
Yes.
Is there any follow-up we need to know about or we need to do or?
Yes. Just
Okay.
follow up, but nothing specific. There was a meeting scheduled Monday, yesterday, at 2:00 with Jane, Jeff Batten,
Oh.
and myself. Because of my need to be in Carthage for the elected leaders conference, although I encouraged the meeting to be held, Partners in Progress decided they would just defer that, and Jane is already in touch with them about another date.
Okay.
And at that time,
Good.
we will discuss with them the amenities to Market Square and the other streets that are going to happen, and how that all fits into the other plans we have for the village, and to take some input from them on concerns about any of those that they want to make.
Does it
And
make sense to?
then there will be our idea, and basically they've agreed to this, Jane, is that on some basis, whether it's quarterly or whatever we want to work out, that we will meet with them and talk about current issues going on at their end in the village and try to have a dialogue set up and a process for evaluating their concerns. That means we also need to find a way to reach out to the rest of the business community, because not everybody's a member of Pinehurst Business Partners, and we need to make a genuine effort to meet with those who are not, including our landlords and other tenants that are not a member. That's the report. Right, Jane? Okay. Anything else? Is there a motion to adjourn the work session?
I move to adjourn the work session.
I second it.
Motion by Lydia Bosch, a second by Pat Pizzella to adjourn the work session for June 10th, 2023. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the meeting's adjourned. Thank you.